From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have for you on the menu. Expenses under wraps. MEPs will not have to reveal how they spent taxpayers' money. Not ruling out Remain. Will the UK's Labour Party take a political gamble on Brexit? Blame the messenger. Does the media bear responsibility for the rise of nationalism? Swedish confidence. The Prime Minister is ousted in a dramatic vote. And in tonight's Raw Moment, the biggest baby at the UN General Assembly. It's good to have you with us. Now it's time to meet the panel. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Euronews. Darren, which story do you like?
I think it does have to be MEPs. Expenses for an institution that bases itself on transparency and scrutiny and openness. I'm not entirely sure this has been a good day for them. And I do think it feeds into the worst perceptions of some of the European Union's enemies.
Exactly. And tonight we're also joined by David Hirschenhorn. He is a chief Brussels correspondent at Politico Europe. Or which one do you like?
I'm watching the UN General Assembly. Both Commission President Juncker and Council President Tusk are there. But we know there are a lot of crybabies on the world stage, including Donald Trump. So we'll see which one is the biggest.
A lot of things coming out of New York. And tonight we are joined also by Ernest Urtasun. He is a Green MEP from Spain. Ernest, which story are you watching?
Well, I'm following the Labour conference very closely. Labour not ruling out Remain anymore. I think that's a very important headline.
Important headline, especially for the EU. All right, we'll have more on all of those stories. But first, our top story. 751 MEPs. Hundreds of millions of euros in annual expenses. And according to a ruling today from the European Court of Justice, taxpayers, they're not entitled to know exactly how that money is spent. Now, the legal challenge was brought by journalists after Parliament denied access to documents about the money MEPs receive on top of their salaries. And that included general allowance, travel allowance, daily subsistence, and funds for staffing. Well, today in court, the court sided with the Parliament, refusing to provide access to documents. It says institutions must refuse access to a document where disclosure would undermine the protection of privacy and the integrity of the individual. So I'd like to go to you first, Ernest, as an MEP. Do you agree with this court ruling? Is it right or wrong?
I think it's completely wrong. We've been calling for transparency here in this House. I think a majority of MEPs, according to what we vote on these issues in plenary, are in favour of more transparency, and particularly on the general expenditures allowance, because this is 4,000 euros that come on top of our salary, and this is not an extra salary. This is money that needs to be used in a certain manner. There should be rules, and that is why from the Greens we have a policy that this money is kept in a separate bank account, that we keep receipts of how do we use that money.
If MEPs want transparency, why is this the direction that the Parliament is taking?
Because so far the board of the Parliament has blocked any reform.
Do we know why?
And for transparency, that you should ask Mr. Tajani and his Vice President why that is the case. But I think for us it's very clear. It's very easy to put very simple rules as we have as Greens and the European Parliament. This money should be kept in a separate bank account. We need to keep receipts of everything that we spend, and there should be checks on these receipts. And of course, we're not asking the House to check on every single receipt, but you can do some controls on a certain percentage of the receipts randomly among different MEPs. This could be done very easily.
But you know what the question is going to be. What are you trying to hide? I mean, it's absurd that this is even in court, right? This is not about personal integrity or personal privacy. This is about public integrity. And if Europe wants to, for sure, get themselves more Donald Trumps elected, this is the way to go about it.
This is the
not
kind of
telling
behavior
voters how their money is used. It's a basic issue of trust between voters and government.
Absolutely. This is the kind of thing that fuels your skepticism, isn't it?
It fuels skepticism in general. Again, what are you hiding? Why is the leadership of the Parliament against this? MEPs could certainly disclose receipts. They could say we went for coffee with a constituent without saying who was drinking the coffee. There's nothing that's being dealt with here that is a national security issue. That stuff is handled in the capitals. So again, the question goes back to President Tajani and to the EPP, the dominant party in the Parliament. What are you hiding?
This question. Now, this case at the ECJ was originally brought by journalists. And Darren, you managed to speak to one of the journalists today who brought on the case. Right?
And when you look at some of the Tessa, just the figures involved in what you guys get and what you claim. I mean, you know, there's obviously the monthly salary of 8,611 euros. Then there's an office salary of before tax 24,164. That's for office staff. Then there's the daily subsistence when it comes to expenses, €307 per day. And then on top of that, that 4,000, which is not accountable at all. I mean, that's to most Europeans. That is way and beyond what they get. And to not have to properly explain what you're spending the money on, I think, is what people are outraged at. Now, the explanation, of course, from the Parliament is this about privacy and it's about work overload. But given you're weighing up those factors about transparency and balance and scrutiny in a democracy, that's probably quite important. But as you say, I did speak to one of those journalists, Anushka Delic. She is based in Ljubljana. And this is what she had to say. And I asked her, first of all, about how she thought today's ruling had gone.
I think it's disappointing, to say the least, or to be diplomatic. It's disappointing. And it's also worrisome. I think it comes at the worst possible time, given the state of the European Union today. I think that it really feeds into the hands of EU sentiments or EU skeptics, because it is in effect saying that the members of the European Parliament are not to be scrutinized by the public because it's their private data. And if we say that this data is private, then that goes against all principles of public spending that any other EU institution or any other EU official has to adhere to, or, a democratic institution in any European member state.
I was just going to, is this the end of the battle, or do you carry on your mission?
Of course it's not. I'm half Croatian. I have the Balkan spirit in me, and I will definitely not stop. And the group will surely appeal the decision.
So she raised there the point that you, David, also raised. I mean, but is the European Parliament really any worse than other governments around the world?
Well, let's just consider how crazy this is. If I take an MEP out to lunch or coffee in Brussels, I'm subject to more accountability and disclosure than the MEP is. I mean, this is very
different. Even though it's public money.
Even though it's public money, right. I've got to tell Politico who I'm having coffee with and what they're paying for. This is the kind of thing that there is. I mean, you do have some parallels. In the United States Congress, which I've covered, Congress is not actually subject to the freedom of information laws that cover the White House and all the executive agencies. It's another example of this remarkable behavior by legislatures, by parliaments who use their ability to make laws to shield themselves from basic public disclosure. So it's not singular, it's not unique, but it is absolutely ridiculous.
And there is a warning here, of course, from what happened in Britain and the UK Parliament 10 years ago. A massive scandal. MPs were spending money on duck houses and moats and on second mortgages. And that has really undermined people's trust in politicians, so much so that you could argue it was one of the factors that led to the vote on Brexit. The people simply did not trust what politicians had to say anymore. And that is a warning shot for the European Union.
I think it's a matter of transparency and of democracy. It's taxpayers' money. People have the right to know how it is spent. But also, with that transparency, we would avoid probably certain misuse of funds if they happen. When everybody is on the public scrutiny, then you would think twice before misusing your money. So that's why I think it should be absolutely obligatory for all MEPs that all this information is public, as we are calling for.
And you were saying that majority of MEPs
we voted for that.
But actually, not all MEPs support. Not all of them support this, because some MEPs support the move to allow the public, to allow the public access to their expenses. And some Germans in the EPP group are particularly against the full transparency of their allowances and expenses, because they've previously blocked measures that would mean, better accounting of expenses. So we invited several German EPP members to join us today, but they did decline. They did, however, they sent us this statement. They said today's judgment protects the citizens. Whoever approaches MEPs must be certain that the issue he or she raises is treated confidentially without MEPs being held accountable, who they paid the 2 coffees for. MEPs are not obliged to disclose their travel expenses, where they go, by what means, and to meet to whom. So this is a question of privacy, and it was raised by the European Court of Justice as well. But is there a point to be made here about privacy?
No, well, they don't even want to disclose their own names when doing that statement. So I think this is rather unbelievable. Well, if they want to defend that this should be kept secret, I mean, they should argue with that openly, saying who they are. I mean, for me, it's a matter. It's not a matter of privacy because we're talking about taxpayers' money. For me, it's very clear.
And I'd venture, I guess, some of these same German MEPs were strongly in support of accountability and disclosure by Greece when Greece was receiving EU money in order to survive its debt crisis. So come on, this is a really...
I think there is an argument to be made about, of course, there will be an increased workload, even if it is just random checks. There will be that. But you have to balance things up. Clearly, this court cases cost money. But you have to balance it up by the fact that it is incredibly important for taxpayers who work incredibly hard, who mostly earn a lot less money than MEPs, that they are at least able to find out what their MEPs are spending their money on.
I think one of the other arguments is that, doing so, putting so much attention into declaring all these expenses would take away from the time that MEPs would have to do their jobs.
But again, they've had time to fight this court case.
I mean, sorry, I kept all my receipts and I have my numbers in my website. Sure. It's not a lot of work. And we have assistants here to help us with that. I mean, this is just ridiculous.